Everyone is familiar with the legend of how Magellan was killed by Lapu-Lapu during the Battle of Mactan. Lapu-Lapu is the most well-known Filipino figure after Jose Rizal. There are several other names for Lapu-Lapu, including si Lapu-Lapu, Salip-Pulaca, Kalipulaco, and Lapu-Lapu de Mantag. Name: the man is remembered for his conflict with the Portuguese explorer and conquistador Ferdinand Magellan. Like Rizal, he has statues all over the Philippines and was the inspiration for the naming of a city, a fish, and several other things. But do you know what really happened? Lapu-Lapu has been romanticized and the subject of folklores and legends. The legend of Lapu-Lapu, who is portrayed as charging toward Magellan with a swift swipe of his weapon and bulging biceps, is folklore. I now have a clearer understanding of what transpired in the past thanks to my research on Lapu-Lapu. Even the original eyewitnesses to the events embellished what they saw and heard. My interpretation, which is based on the research I have done, will be done as best I can. Borneo is where Lapu-Lapu originally came from. It should come as no surprise since the majority of Filipinos are descended from Malaysian and Indonesian immigrants. Lapu-Lapu was a seafaring pirate. He traveled to Sugbo or Cebu to meet Raha Humabon, the Sugbo chief, his brother-in-law. Raha Humabon's wife, Hara Humamay, is Lapu-Lapu's sister. Lapu-Lapu asked Humabon for a plot of land so that he and his people can settle there. Lapu-Lapu was given the choice of the island of Opong, now known as Mactan, or the region of Mandawiwi, now known as Mandaue. Lapu-Lapu decided on Opong, where he established his tribe. Sugbo was already a trading hub at the time thanks to the presence of Chinese and other Asians. Lapu-Lapu, being a pirate, exploited and took advantage the location of his land. You must cross the Strait of Cebu, which separates the islands of Opong and Cebu, in order to get to Cebu. In order for the merchant ships to pass through the strait, Lapu-Lapu would either raid them for their cargo or demand a tribute. This annoyed Humabon because it was interfering with his trading operations. Additionally, Lapu-Lapu was constantly gaining strength and power. If Humabon does not stop him, he will be able to challenge him for total dominance in the region. Of the 4 chiefs who ruled Mactan at the time, Lapu-Lapu was the supreme chief. When Magellan and his 3 ships showed up in Sugbo, Humabon welcomed them with open arms. He recognized the chance to use the Spaniards against Lapu-Lapu. Without having any prior knowledge of Christianity, Humabon readily consented when Magellan asked him to adopt his religion. In addition to not knowing who Jesus Christ is, he has never read the Bible. Magellan gave Humabon's wife a small statue of the infant Jesus and planted a cross. Magellan gave the islands the name Archipelago of St. Lazarus. Villalobos, who arrived with Legazpi about 5 years later, gave the islands the name Philippines. Naturally, in exchange for converting to Christianity, Humabon asked Magellan for help in defeating Lapu-Lapu. Magellan agreed, believing that with his ships, his arsenal of weapons, and his armor, he could easily defeat Lapu-Lapu. At first, Lapu-Lapu agreed to pay homage to the colonizers and acknowledge the power of the Spanish crown through Magellan. However, the friendship deteriorated after Magellan insisted that Lapu-Lapu kiss Raha Humabon's hand in order to show respect for him as the supreme chieftain, as is customary in Europe. Magellan's troops twice attacked the village of the chieftain, burning the homes, but Lapu-Lapu refused, so they withdrew. Magellan then organized a full-scale battle to defeat Lapu-Lapu and his allies. The plan to attack Lapu-Lapu by Humabon and Magellan was revealed to Lapu-Lapu by his spies in Humabon's village. Lapu-Lapu gathered his roughly 1,500 warriors in preparation for the battle. Magellan intended to attack Lapu-Lapu with his soldiers after using his 3 ships to bombard the island. Due to the low tide on the day of the attack, unfortunately for Magellan, the ships were unable to approach the shore close enough to bombard Lapu-Lapu. The Spanish boats were reportedly forced to anchor their ships 2 crossbow flights away from the coast, according to Antonio Pigafetta's account of the events. So, in order to engage Lapu-Lapu's forces in hand-to-hand combat, Magellan and his men, about 57 of them, must disembark the ships and wade in the water. Magellan and his men were armed with large, heavy swords and armor. Their wet clothing made them heavier than usual as they waded in the water. Unlike Lapu-Lapu's warrior, who hardly has anything on other than the cloth that covers their privates. Additionally, they were accustomed to being on the water and were seafarers. Lapu-Lapu was described as viejo, which is Spanish for old or 60 years or older in the testimonies of 18 of the 27 members of the Spanish forces who survived the battle. He did not engage in combat with Magellan, but he took the initiative and devised the strategy for defeating the Spaniard. Contrary to expectations, he was an elderly man with sagging biceps instead of a young man. The warriors intended to use their spears and arrows to attack the Spaniards' legs since they were protected by body armor. When a soldier suffered a wound, they would swarm over them and eventually kill them. To begin the assault on Mactan, 57 members of the Spanish forces boarded a small boat instead of their larger ship. A man named Cristobal Rabello, also known as Rebelio, who was allegedly Magellan's illegitimate son, was one of the war party's members. Rabello was killed in the melee by arrows that had been poisoned. This so incensed Magellan that he rushed into the battle as if he were a madman and was encircled by the enemies and snapped his life miserably as a result. Magellan was first immobilized by a poisoned arrow that hit his leg. The leader of the Spanish expedition was then killed with a bamboo lance to the chest. Magellan was not slain by Lapu-Lapu. Magellan was killed by another warrior or group of warriors. Magellan underestimated the fighting prowess of the native warriors because they had only primitive weapons. Additionally, the Portuguese turned down Humabon's offer to send a large number of native warriors to help the Spanish forces. Lapu-Lapu sent more than 1,000 warriors to fight the Spaniards. 18 soldiers from the Spanish forces were able to go back to their country. Humabon provided refuge to 9 survivors. The battle's victor, Lapu-Lapu, demanded that Humabon execute the survivors because he had killed Magellan. Humabon refused and instead sold the survivors to Chinese traders as slaves. Lapu-Lapu and Humabon were able to come to an understanding after the Spaniards had left. Lapu-Lapu returned to Borneo, where he eventually passed away. 5 years later, under the leadership of Legazpi and Villalobos, the Spaniards returned. They did not return this time hoping to rekindle old friendships. They launched an attack on Raha Humabon's village and set it ablaze. One of the soldiers found the statue of Santo Niño after checking out the wreckage. The Basilica de Santo Niño in Cebu City currently houses this statue of Santo Niño. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can make more videos that highlights the Philippines and Filipinos.